Hi, welcome to Quick Learn Photography, straight to the point videos that teach you everything that I've learned in over 10 years of professional photography. So I'm James, and in this video we're going to talk about the exposure triangle, and by the end of it you're going to know what it is and how to use it. So hopefully you might have seen my 3 previous videos about the 3 elements or variables that help you with exposure, or how to control exposure when it comes to photography, all the different settings that you can use. And that was shutter speed, how fast the shutter is open and closed, letting light into the sensor. Aperture on your lens, how wide the aperture goes and lets more light in, and the effects that can have as well. And also ISO, how sensitive the sensor is. When you ramp it up, you make it more or less sensitive, and it will gather more light and make it more sensitive to light. So those 3 variables all work together to help with exposure. So hopefully you've seen those videos and you know what they are and how they work. So just a brief overview, because these 3 are so important when it comes to exposure. How they'll all work with each other is just, if you put one up, the other will go down, kind of like a seesaw, or the exposure will go down. Then you can control it, or 2 of them will tap out or reach their max, and then you need ISO and so on. So they're like constantly juggling around depending on what effect you want. So you might want a really low shutter speed to cause like motion blur, so you need a smaller aperture, and you don't need high ISO for that. Or you might want a really fast aperture, shutter speed, perhaps for an indoor sports event or something where you want to freeze movement, so you're going to need the widest aperture and higher ISO. So they're all balancing out over each other. It's like that triangle, trying to get that exposure that you want. Doesn't have to be a perfect exposure, because sometimes you might want it darker. You want to keep the ambient, you want to look how it actually looks at the time. You don't want the automatic modes to make it look brighter than what it is. Okay, so it's all about controlling that. So I'll just do a brief overview on the back of the camera now and show you how the exposure triangle works. Okay, so I'm just going to show you on the back of the camera the exposure triangle. So sorry, it's a very boring scene of my sofa, but there's different colors and that. So here we go. So can you see there it says 0, 0? That's telling you, it's like a meter reading, that it's got a sort of a medium perfect exposure. So if I go to this, see that plus and minus there? So there's the middle and it's on 0. That's what you see through the viewfinder on DSLRs, a plus and a minus. So that's what that means. It's telling you it thinks it's got a medium exposure, which it kind of has there. But now look at the shutter speed, 1/13 of a second. This is a low aperture, which is sort of like for an entry level or a standard lens, f3.5. So let's say that's as wide as it can go. We're at ISO 100 and 1/13 of a second. So the shutter speed there is the weakness. If you were handheld, that's going to be too low or too blurry if you want to capture any kind of movement. So let's raise the shutter speed up to say 200th of a second. There, now it'll capture movement, walking, that kind of thing. Now you see the problem. We're at the widest aperture, f3.5. We can't go any lower. So this is where the exposure triangle comes in, and see it flashing there? -2, that's telling you it's too underexposed. So the camera thinks it's too underexposed, and it's pretty right. So let's go to ISO. Now the setting for this is there. There's the button for ISO. You can dedicate it to whatever, and on DSLRs sometimes you have an actual, or different cameras, you have an actual button saying ISO. So let's click that. Now this is the 3rd variable. So we've got shutter speed and aperture kind of maxed out. Let's raise it up. So this is where your ISO now comes in. See it? Lovely. So let's go to 800. Let's go to 1000 ISO. Lovely. It's still saying it's -7 exposure. That's what the camera thinks, but we're ignoring that because you're keeping the ambient. So to me, that looks pretty good. You get the idea. So if you want it even brighter than that and you want to keep the same shutter speed, then you have to raise the ISO. So we're at 2000 ISO now. And there it is. The camera thinks it's perfect. But you may not think it's perfect. You might want it more ambient. So let's go down, get it a bit more dark and moodier looking. There you go. Let's say you want that. And you want that nice, dark, earthy look. The camera now thinks it's -1.7 on the exposure. It's telling you it's too dark, it's too dark. But you might want that. Do you remember the low light one? Like ambient sort of, you might want that kind of darkness. So There it is. Let's get to a sort of a good medium, 1000. There you go. You got a nice bright exposure. You're at your widest aperture, and you will capture movement like general talking, walking, gesturing, that sort of thing. So this is good. So if you're in a low light environment, that is a good setting to have, and you'd keep it there at 1000 ISO. Okay, now that, again, the bigger your camera sensor, the more it will be able to handle those higher ISOs, but for most cameras, that's fine. Right, let's go to another variable now. Let's say you want less of a shallow depth of field. So you're gonna change the aperture. Let's say you want to go f11 to get everything in the shot. Now it's too dark, but you might be on a tripod like the camera is, so we can drop the shutter speed right down to, say, about there. That's perfect. There you go. Oh, that's f13 actually. So the dial for the aperture is here, which is exactly like this one. It's just a dial. So there we go. There's your balance. You got the exposure. So you're at 20th of a second. Now you can't hand hold that, so that's on a tripod. So that's good if you're on a timer, you're doing like something still or landscape and you're on a tripod. But the ISO is high now and you want a really, really clean image. So let's get the variable down. Let's get it back down to 100 ISO. I've gone past it. There it is. 100 ISO. So now at f11, 20th of a second, that's way too dark. So if you're on a tripod, if you're doing any kind of nighttime shot, now let's adjust the shutter speed. Let's get that down. There you go. A 1/6 of a second. That should just about do it. The camera thinks it's just slightly underexposed. So that would be good for motion blur if you want anything moving, like everything else dead still, like buildings or nature or whatever, anything that's still, but anything moving like a car or a person walking, that is now going to be blurry. Brilliant. So let's go to another variable. Let's say you're doing indoor sports and you want to really freeze the action. So you go to your widest aperture. Let's go to 3.5 again, just if it's a beginner entry level lens. You want to really capture movement. So let's say it's like an indoor basketball match or something. You want at least 500th of a second. So now it's way, way too dark. So ISO again. Here we go. 2500 ISO. So the camera thinks it's just under, but again, you might want to keep that exposure. So now this is where smaller sensor cameras are going to start struggling at this kind of ISO if you're going to have that kind of shutter speed. But we'll get onto that later on. But it's still okay. It'll still be a usable image. The image is anything moving at 500th of a second, like a sports sort of scene, other than like, you know, Formula One or something. But 500th of a second will do it. So hopefully that demonstrates how the exposure triangle works, like balancing around with all the different variables. And we're going to get onto auto ISO later. I'll show you quickly now a little teaser. Let's go to auto ISO. There. So now you don't have to worry so much. So I can change the aperture and the auto ISO, see it flashing? It's going to start adjusting accordingly. That's great, but you need to keep a leash on it. So we're going to deal with that later on. So no matter what I change things to, the auto ISO is going to manage it. Okay, so I hope that helps. And that is the exposure triangle. Okay, so I hope that helped. Just a brief overview. They're really important, so just practice with that and just try and learn this in manual, because in automatic modes, we're going to learn about that later, how to use those, but it's best to learn in manual first. So that's the exposure triangle. Thanks for watching, and I hope it helped.